Coming up this week on Sporting Journal Radio.
They're not always eating them shallow. That's the thing to point out, too.
Oh, you can absolutely catch walleyes during the bug hatch.
10 states allow crossbows, and 8 of them, the crossbow harvest is higher than vertical bows.
You know, I've been using that new Northland eye candy, and I've been using it on a drop shot a lot.
I fish, I hunt, and always will. Broadcasting from the Eau Claire Outdoors Studios. Presented by OnX. Know where you stand with OnX. We're not just a radio show anymore. This is Sporting Journal Radio. That's right. Welcome to the show. I'm Bret Amundson. Thanks for tuning in wherever you're getting this, on the station, on the network, on the podcast, or on YouTube. Thank you very much. That's Dan Amundson right over there. Dan, how you doing?
Doing all right.
David Eckhart normally is with us. He tried to join us, but he is out working on food plots right now. So we'll try to check in with him and see how things are going. So if you want to learn a little bit more about food plots, we're going to be bringing you David's expertise on that subject here in the next couple of weeks on Sporting Journal Radio. Well, there he is working right there if you're watching this.
That's live.
That's live, yeah. Pretty much.
Real speed, too.
He's going very fast. Yeah, that's hilarious. All right, we've also got Jason Mitchell on the show this week. We're always excited to have Jason on the show. He's going to talk about what he's been up to, including catching walleyes in shallow water. Why are the walleyes in shallow water? Have they always been there? We're going to break it down with Jason coming up and ask him what he likes about using plastics versus live bait, and will he still use live bait? When will he do that? We'll talk all sorts of stuff fishing with Jason Mitchell coming up later in the show. We've also got Joe Henry to talk about Lake of the Woods and get a Lake of the Woods fishing report too. First though, Dan, who are this week's sponsors?
This week we have Live Target. Match the hatch with Live Target Lures at livetargetlures.com. Lake of the Woods Tourism. Lake of the Woods is the walleye capital of the world. Plan a trip for this summer at Lake of the Woods, mn.com. Haybell Heights Campground and Resort. Book a trip to Devil's Lake at haybellheights.com. Ottertail Lakes Country. Find your inner otter at ottertaillakescountry.com. Prairie Sportsman. Watch episodes anytime at the Prairie Sportsman YouTube channel or check your local guide for TV listings. And that is all.
Don't forget to check out the Fish Hunt Forever YouTube channel because we were up there at Lake of the Woods doing some filming. We actually filmed for Fish Hunt Forever and also for Prairie Sportsman while we were up there. We got a really neat story coming next season for Prairie Sportsman, and also the video of my 30-inch walleye from Lake of the Woods will be coming to that channel. We have a couple of new videos that are on there now, so if you haven't gone there yet, please go and subscribe to the Fish Hunt Forever YouTube channel. Actually, we have a Lake of the Woods video that Dan filmed up there, right?
Yeah, that should be out by this time this airs. Well, actually, no, it won't. If you're watching this today, this podcast comes out, wait till tomorrow.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
And if you're watching it the day after this podcast comes out, watch it today. If you're watching it the day 2 days after the podcast comes out, you can watch it yesterday.
Hang on, I got to take notes.
So,
okay, so
and then if you watch and listen to this podcast on Monday, you can watch it 2 days ago.
Carry the one.
If you're listening to it on the radio, I don't know when you're listening to it because the show airs like Saturdays and Sundays on 30 different stations. So go to YouTube, figure it out on your own. Check your phone. I don't need to tell you.
I do know of one other video that's up there, and it's our trip to Hayward. If you're looking for a summer vacation for the family, to bring the kids, or just a cool place to go if you like to fish, we got a video all about Hayward now on the Fish Hunt Forever YouTube channel from an Aglow trip that we took up there. We got to tour the Freshwater Fishing Hall of Fame. We got to tour the St. Croix Rod Building Manufacturing Facility, or St. Croix Rod Factory, I guess would be the easier way to say it, and more. So check it out at Fish Hunt Forever on YouTube. While you're there, make sure you roll over to the Sporting Journal Radio YouTube channel and give us a subscribe and a like, and watch our past shows there as well. So, big controversy taking place recently in Minnesota. Now, Wisconsin, you've been dealing with this for a number of years already. In fact, I remember the year that Wisconsin started to allow crossbows as part of the archery season. I don't have anything against crossbows. I was just shocked that it was considered archery equipment and used during the archery season. I thought maybe at first you had to buy, and maybe this is still the case, correct me if I'm wrong, comment below. I thought in Wisconsin you had to buy like a crossbow license to use during the archery season. So you had to buy a special license, but you could use it throughout the entire archery season. So for a long time, in fact, I was at, I think we were at Grandview in Brainerd one year, and it was the governor's fishing opener, and Commissioner Tom Landwehr was there, and I cornered him that night as we were eating dinner. I said, Tom, if you're going to legalize crossbows in Minnesota, just have a special crossbow season. Make it like 17 days and regulate it just like the muzzleloader season. You'll keep the archery hunters happy. You'll keep crossbow hunters happy. You'll even make more money for the DNR to fund the outdoor agency. And, Tom's a nice guy. So well, that's a good suggestion, And then obviously now many years later, here we are 8 years later, whatever it is, the DNR, as far as I know, didn't even make this decision. The legislature made this decision for the DNR and removed the age restriction for crossbow usage and allowed it during the entire archery season. Now, this has ruffled some feathers of bow hunters. Honestly, I don't know who was pushing for this other than crossbow companies.
Minnesota Deer Hunters Association, apparently.
Which is weird because in 2017, I believe it was, the Minnesota Deer Hunters Association was against the use of crossbows during the archery season, like 70% against it, if what I'm reading in some of these past articles is correct. So I went online to do a little bit of digging to find out what other states are doing about crossbows, what effect it's had on deer harvest, and what the public perception has been about it. It's been interesting. So to start over, here in Minnesota, I found a brief article about it in Outdoor News because I didn't know that this was a thing until it happened. And from what I heard from a lot of people, they didn't even know it was a thing. But Outdoor News did have a small little story about it March 16th saying there was a bill introduced. And it was introduced by Samantha Vang, a Democrat from Brooklyn Center. There was a companion bill from, I apologize if I mispronounce your name, Fung Hauge from St. Paul. But also, that bill also had Senator Nathan Weisenberg from the Mille Lacs area, was also on that one too. So these three people introduced this bill to remove the age limitation for using crossbows in Minnesota. It ended up passing. I don't know. I was trying to figure out who voted for it and all this. I'm assuming it was attached to another bill, and it was just a small thing, and people probably didn't even notice that it was in there. In any case, here we are. So what does that mean moving forward? Well, I looked back, and the National Deer Association had an article from Kip Adams back in 2020 stating that 37 states east of the Rocky Mountains, out of those 37 states, 30 of them allowed crossbows to be used by all hunters during at least a portion of the archery season. 25 of those states can differentiate the harvest from a vertical bow versus a crossbow. 11 of those states, the crossbow harvest now exceeds that of vertical bows. So I know there were a lot of numbers in there. I apologize. But essentially, 11 states now take harvest tallies from vertical bows versus crossbows. I'm sorry, 25 states take harvest levels from vertical bows versus crossbows, and 11, the crossbow harvest now is better. In the Southeast, all the states down there allow crossbows, but the vertical bow harvest still dominates. In the Northeast, 10 states allow crossbows, and 8 of them, the crossbow harvest is higher than vertical bows. So right there, you'll see that the crossbow harvest has been successful in a lot of areas and is actually now killing more deer than a vertical bow. The Wisconsin DNR surveyed state wildlife agencies in 19 states a couple of years ago to determine what effect crossbows were having. The project showed participation of hunters using crossbows has been on the rise. Those most interested in using these crossbows were kids, women, and men who were new to bow hunting. They found that most states that allow crossbow use allow it statewide for all of the bow season. And no state interviewed that allowed crossbow use shortened its season or restricted crossbow use from the original law. So Minnesota's crossbow new law has a sunset in 2 years, but everybody thinks it'll just continue the way it's been and they won't shorten it or create a new season. Now that it's here, it probably won't change. Just a few of those states actually measure weapon-specific success rates. So a lot of those states don't differentiate between a vertical bow kill or a crossbow bow kill, so you can't determine what effect crossbows are having. So to me, that's an issue. It should happen. The states that did measure weapon-specific found that crossbow rates were having, or crossbow users were having much higher success rates. Most states haven't determined yet if the Crossbows had any influence on their state's overall deer license, and Crossbows did not cause any change in total deer harvest and did not have any measurable biological impact on the state's deer herds. In Wisconsin, from 2014 to 2018, bow success rates averaged 23%, while the Crossbow success rates were about 10% better, 30 to 33%. So it's a National Deer Association stand is that it's more valuable to have more hunters in the field buying licenses and contributing to game management than to argue about the tools being used. So then I went on to try to find a couple of other articles about it, maybe a pro and a con, so I could read both sides. And Archer's Hub, Peter Campbell writes about crossbow use that they're so similar that crossbows are part and parcel of archery and should be wholly accepted in the sport. So he essentially was all for it. He also goes on to say that crossbows aren't necessarily more accurate, which I thought was interesting. He said, if your accuracy is mediocre with a normal bow, chances are a crossbow won't be of much help in the terms of increasing your accuracy. I was like, really? Tell me how a crossbow is not going to be more accurate than a vertical bow. He says they're very similar, but remember, crossbows are powerful and can shoot clean through various types of traditional archery targets. So he doesn't want you to use traditional archery targets for crossbows because they're so much more powerful than a regular bow. But they're the same and should be used in archery. And then Travis Lang on bowhunter.com in 2019 wrote about the 10-point Nitro XRT is the fastest bow on the planet, crossbow, with speeds up to 470 feet per second. So if you think about some of the even compound bows reaching 330, 340, 350 feet per second, that's pretty fast. But this crossbow can reach 470 feet per second. And then he didn't know much about them. And I'll full disclosure, I've never shot a crossbow. Okay, I'll throw that out there. He hadn't either. He went to the range to try some out, and he said, 2 minor adjustments to the scope that comes equipped on these bows, and I was firing perfect shots. It really was almost too easy. There you have it, from a vertical bow user who went to go shoot a crossbow for the first time, and with 2 small minor adjustments, perfect shots. He goes on to write that Ohio has had a full crossbow inclusion for 35 years, and in 2018, over 5,000 more bucks were killed during the archery season than during the gun season. Of that harvest, 65% of those bucks were taken with a crossbow. So to wrap all this up, the pros of a crossbow would be hunter recruitment, more money infused in the economy, more money for resource management. More accuracy might mean fewer wounded deer. The cons, man, this is considered a bow shooting 470 feet per second. More accuracy, shooting out to 100 yards, potentially more. The one crossbow, he said, could shoot out to 200 yards, although they advised against that for an ethical shot, but still 200 yards. Longer range could mean more wounded deer. Ultimately, you're going to have more people in the woods during the archery season earlier in the year. You could have more people killing deer earlier in the year. So a lot of people talk about you're not going to change the amount of deer shot. You're just going to move them up earlier in the season. So archery season is going to start to get as crowded as the gun season. You're going to see fewer and fewer gun licenses sold because people are going to hunt during the archery season because you have a longer season. The weather is generally nicer. You can pick and choose your days. And now you can have effective ranges out to 100 yards and a real easy weapon to shoot that's very, very accurate. So, yeah. It's going to get crazy. I mean, one of the reasons I like bow hunting is to get away from all the people. I hate the gun season because it's like the Orange Army out there and you're dodging bullets everywhere you go. That could potentially, I'm not saying that's going to happen with crossbow uses. I'm probably painting more of a dire picture than what's actually fact and reality. But in reality, you are going to have more people in the woods earlier in the year shooting deer a lot earlier in the year. So you're going to have competition to get out there, to get to your spots earlier, especially if you're hunting public land, because there's going to be more people out there going after those big bucks. So if you're trying to pattern deer early in the season and shoot them with a bow, you're going to have a lot more competition. Now, we need to self-police kind of the outdoor world, so we're not letting our arguments deter new hunters. We also need to stand up to stop the eroding of time-honored traditions that keep the outdoors special. People have argued that compound bows are too different than, say, traditional bows, recurves. But in reality, there are enough similarities that they can be categorized together as archery equipment. The effective range for most archers won't be much different with those different bows, with 40 yards or so being the farthest most compound users will shoot, with speeds between 200 to 300 or so feet per second. Of course, some bows go over that. Now, I'm not against crossbows. If people want to use them, I was okay with the age restriction and the medical conditions, but let's just create a season for them. You can create more revenue. You can keep the crossbow companies happy, and you can also keep archers happy. And if you want to talk about the differences, when you're talking about 100 yards for crossbows, speeds over 400 feet per second, you're in a completely different world than vertical bows. But to me, the most important difference is when you got that big buck coming and you draw back and you got to hold that bow at full draw, sometimes over a minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, you're going to be sweating, shaking. You do that with a crossbow. You might even have your crossbow on a gun rest. You're just sitting there kickback. That could be the biggest difference between vertical bows and crossbows when you're waiting at full draw for that deer to walk into an opening. And because of that, I believe crossbows should be given their own season. And I promise you, it wasn't the thousands of people out there clamoring for a crossbow use during the regular bow season. They weren't calling their reps to get this passed. It was 100% crossbow companies working to get this passed. So follow the money, and you'll find out why we have crossbow usage during the entire archery season. Dan, what do you think?
Yeah, you basically summed it up. We got to take a break pretty quick, so I can't get into it too much, but I'm going to go fishing.
Joe Henry and Jason Mitchell are coming up. Kodiak, a North American waterfowl film, is coming to the Fish Hunt Forever YouTube channel.
Well, I've been a sea duck hunter for about 30 seconds, and I've already got one that's probably going to go on the wall, so this is the coolest duck hunt I've ever been on.
Presented by Boss Shot Shells, with support from Sitka and Beretta, and additional support from Eau Claire Outdoors, High Prairie Animal Arts, and the Association of Great Lakes Outdoor Riders. Watch Kodiak on the Fish Hunt Forever YouTube channel. 852 million acres of public land, 147 million private properties, all in the palm of your hand. The #1 hunting GPS app just got better. With hundreds of custom map layers, 3D and topographic maps, you can easily scout on the road or at home before you go. And now you can get important weather details, CWD detection, and even know what crops have been planted where. Get the most trusted hunting GPS app ever made. OnX. Know where you stand with OnX.
Did you know there are more than 1,000 lakes in Otter Tail County?
Yep, and I'm gonna fish as many as I can. I'm an outdoorsy otter. Nothing beats a full day of fishing for me. The lakes of Otter Tail County give me plenty of options to lower my boat and snag the perfect catch. Not an outdoorsy otter? No problem. Otter Tail County has something for everyone. You just need to find your inner otter.
To find your inner otter, go to OtterTailLakesCountry.com. All right, now, once again, it's time to go up to Lake of the Woods to check in with Joe Henry. Joe, how's it going?
Hey, Bret. How you doing, buddy?
I saw something really interesting when we were up at Lake of the Woods last week. Dan and I were out there on a really calm day, and we were getting ready to film an episode of Prairie Sportsman, and the crew wasn't there yet. So we were going to go out and kind of pre-fish a little bit, try to find some spots for them, because we were going to fish with these guys for 2 days and basically try to put them on some fish, take them out. I was going to be running one of the rental boats from Arneson's, and Dan was in his boat. Then they had a couple of their own boats too. So we were bouncing around to some of the different reefs, and we wanted to go north. Like, we were supposed to go up to the northwest angle during that week, and we ended up not going up there, but we wanted to fish up there. So it was really calm. We're hitting these spots, and we kind of looked at each other and we're like, should we run north? And before Dan even answered, he had the throttle down, pointed north. And we at least went up around Garden Island and fished up around there. And we caught fish, Joe. But one of the more interesting things that happened is it was pretty calm. It was hot. So of course you're going to deal with, some black flies and things like that when you're out in a boat. But we stopped short of Garden, Dan, by how much?
We were pretty close to it.
We were close, but we weren't.
We were like in the fishing spot of Garden Island,
But we weren't up next to the island.
No, we weren't on shore.
We weren't downwind of the island.
Well, there was no wind.
Yeah, there was no wind. And as soon as we stopped the boat, we had bugs all over us, like little gnats basically all over us. and we were just trying to figure out, like, how did they find us so fast? You know, what the heck? And the only thing I could think of is that we drove up in the middle of a bug hatch. Like, these bugs were just, maybe they were coming out of the lake. I don't know. I have no idea. Have you ever experienced something like that?
Absolutely. And it's funny because, I was just fishing up on Lake of the Woods here not too long ago, and I was talking about pulling spinners with crawlers. I was going to try it because we started jigging. And it was right at that transition time where people weren't using spinners and crawlers yet. And I said, geez, the water temp's 73. That's more than where I'm going to have to pull a spinner. And somebody in the boat made the comment, I normally don't start pulling spinners and crawlers until I see some bug hatches starting to happen. And, lo and behold, that was just last week, and we're hearing about bug hatches now. There were some fish flies that were hatching recently, and that's one of the things about being on some of the big water is that, when you talk about walleyes and how they're responding to bug hatches, a lot of people, I think, have this envision where they're eating these bugs that are flying around, and the fact of the matter is they're eating the larvae that come out of the mud in the bottom of the lake. They come up in a worm form or a larval form, and that's what they're eating. And then eventually what those larvae will do is they'll get to the top, they'll shed their casing, and they'll fly away up the top of the water. It's a whole biological experiment when you're out on these areas. And, it's interesting because sometimes it changes the way you fish. And the other thing is that is huge, a huge part of the forage base for all fish, including walleyes. People say, gosh, there's a bug hatch. Should I even go fishing? I have too much competition for food. Oh, you can absolutely catch walleyes during a bug hatch. Pulling spinners is a very, very good method to do that. Some people will pull they'll downsize their spinner and pull small spinners through that bug hatch, kind of mimicking some of that stuff. Other people, they'll take the strategy of heading to an area where there's not a bug hatch, maybe shallow sand, maybe rocks, and just not deal with the competition. But again, it's all strategy. I'll tell you though, this time of year, pulling spinners with crawlers is just turned on. And yep, people are still jigging. People are pulling spinners with minnows. People are pulling crankbaits. All of those are catching fish. But right now, pulling a snell spinner or a harness with a crawler is absolutely deadly. And it's going to be deadly now all summer into the fall.
Dan, maybe you can just describe it if you remember, but we were seeing a lot of walleyes spitting up bugs, or when you were cleaning fish, you were pulling some of those bugs out of them, weren't you?
Well, they were in my live well.
Oh,
I'd
yeah.
see them, they were regurgitating in the live well. I don't know what they were. They were creepy and gross and digested and all this and that. I don't know. I think, Joe, maybe I sent a picture to you when we were there, and I don't know what they were. I'm not super familiar. I'm not a big insect guy. I'm not familiar with my bugs, but that's definitely what they're feeding on. And we seemed to be one of the first boats to be pulling spinners down where we were, and definitely paid off that first night when you caught that big fish, Bret.
Yeah. Oh gosh, absolutely. Yeah. And we caught a lot of fish pulling spinners, and then we actually did some jigging too, Joe, and I was using the live scope, and basically I would we were kind of anchored off some structure, and then I was watching fish come in about 20 feet of water, and then they were bumping up on top to anywhere from 13 to 16 feet, and I assume coming up to feed up there. And so we had a guy up in the front of the boat who was jigging, and I think he was in like 16 feet of water, and he was vertically jigging. And then I was in the back of the boat, and I was casting a jig out to where I'd see him coming in 30, 40 feet away, and they were coming in on the bottom. And we were catching them in both places, up on top. And then I think I was cutting them off before they'd come up on top. But it was fun to watch that pattern, to see them come in to feed like that.
Well, I'll tell you what, so people that do have that technology with forward-facing sonar, they are using it on Lake of the Woods with success. And I think one of the neatest things about that forward-facing sonar is that it not only does it help you catch fish, and I don't use it yet. I will eventually. I don't use it yet. But it not only helps you catch fish at times. I think the other thing is it's very interesting watching the fish behavior. It really gives you a better picture of what's going on down there. I can tell you I was up at the Northwest Angle last year, and a group of guys came in with just some monster crappies, loaded up the fish cleaning table, some big crappies. And I said, well, how'd you guys find them? Were you fishing for them? And they said, well, what we're doing is we're going up in the islands area. We're going point to point, just cherry picking walleye spots, catching walleyes. And when we're using a trolling motor and buzzing to another point, from one point to another point, he said we saw a big school of fish that was suspended in deep water. Of course, we figured they're crappies. We started fishing. We caught them. The interesting thing, they said, is that we'd be fishing these crappies, and all of a sudden, there'd be a big fish, either a big pike or a muskie, that would come flying through that school, trying to pick off one of those crappies, and the school would scatter. And then we'd have to go looking for them again. And then they'd come together again in a different area close by. And we'd find them, we'd catch some more crappies, and then it would happen again. A big fish would go flying through the middle. How interesting, isn't it?
Oh, it's amazing what you see with that forward-facing sonar that you just have no idea. I mean, you'd have no idea that was going on below the surface. But it explains it sometimes when you're catching fish and, you know, say it's a school of crappies or something like that, and you're picking them off, and then all of a sudden everything slows down for a while. And it's either that school just kind of moving off and maybe roaming around, but a lot of times it can be a big predator coming through and spooking them off. And you wouldn't know that without that technology. It's just so much fun. And I used it, Joe. I'm pretty sure I told this story last week on the show, but I used it when we were pulling spinners and I was in Dan's boat. He's got his live scope up on his trolling motor. So he's watching in front, looking for fish, looking for structure. And I run my live scope off the back. So when we're trolling spinners, I was able to point mine straight off the back, and I could watch I was seeing my bottom bouncer most of the time, but I could lift my bottom bouncer up off a structure, drop it down the back side of it as we came up over reefs or rocks or tree stumps or whatever the case may be. And now multiple times since then, I've seen fish come up behind it, and I know. And sometimes they're not all. I don't always see them, but a lot of times I've known when fish are about to hit that spinner because I've seen them on that live scope. And that 30-incher, I saw him just for a split second before he ate it, and I was about to spit some words out of my mouth because I was so excited, and I don't even think I got him out, but all of a sudden he was on, and I'd seen him right before he hit it. And but if I wasn't able to watch that, you know, I was able to follow those contours so precisely by being able to watch that on that technology. It was amazing, Joe.
Yeah, it is, and I think it's a very helpful device, and more people are getting it, and it's neat, you know. You know, the other thing, and obviously when you're pulling spinners, you know, you basically what you're doing is I always tell people that don't use forward-facing sonar to just have your bottom bouncer and just touch that bottom once in a while. Every once in a while, just touch it. If you can't touch it when you drop your rod tip, just let a little more line out, just so you can touch it. You don't want to drag that bottom. Just keep in contact with it, and that's going to do kind of the same thing. Obviously, not to the detail you were doing it, Bret, but you know, you get the picture for people that don't have it. Tell you those spinners this time of year, you guys, 2-hook harness, a crawler. You know what? In a 2-ounce weight, whether it's a bottom bouncer or an inline weight, I'll tell you, pretty darn deadly. Maintain a 45-degree angle, you know, when you're fishing that bouncer, and you're going to go at about a mile to 1.25 miles per hour. And I'll tell you what, on Lake of the Woods, hammered gold spinners, golden pink, golden glow white, orange, chartreuse. I mean, just a number of those bright colors or shiny colors, they can be absolutely deadly for walleyes.
Hey, Joe, we got Jason Mitchell coming up, and he has got a tip for crawler harnesses that I'd never heard before that might surprise you. We got him coming up, but if people want to plan a trip to Lake of the Woods, Joe, what should they do?
You know what? Hey, check out our website, and that is lakeofthewoodsmn.com.
Northern Minnesota's Walleye Factory is a year-round world-class fishing destination. The perfect getaway this summer is just a short drive to Lake of the Woods. Fish Big Traverse Bay, the Rainy River, or visit the unique Northwest Angle. To catch big fish, you have to go where the big fish are. Plan your trip to Lake of the Woods at lakeofthewoodsmn.com. That's lakeofthewoodsmn.com. Live Target, the leader in Match the Hatch, is back with new lures that also match the action. Introducing the Live Craw. The Live Craw is irresistible to bass, walleye, and other freshwater species. FTech's winner, the Ultimate Frog, looks and acts just like a swimming frog. With an exposed ultra-point mustad hook and replaceable legs, the Ultimate Frog has 2 styles, 2 sizes, and 8 colors. And iCast and FTech's winner, the Live Shrimp, mimics a fleeing shrimp for saltwater anglers. Coming soon from Live Target. Devil's Lake is legendary, and this summer has been legendary for walleyes. Don't miss out. Call Haybale Heights Campground and Resort today to book one of their modern cabins on East Bay. The cabins are furnished with a full bathroom, kitchen, and all the amenities like high-speed internet, and are clean following CDC guidelines. Staying at Haybale Heights gives you full access to a private boat launch, fish cleaning station, and beach area. Learn more at haybaleheights.com. That's haybaleheights.com. Plan your trip to legendary Devil's Lake today. All right, you probably know. Oh, sorry, I thought I heard something there. Okay. All right, you probably know our next guest pretty well from the fishing world, from the hunting world, from the podcast world, from the TV world. The guy does it all. It's Jason Mitchell, and he even does podcasts while he's driving. Jason, thanks for coming on the show. Where are you headed right now?
Hey, actually, I'm going out. I planted some trees earlier on some property I have for deer hunting, and it rained last week, and so I'm just going out to check them and maybe baby them if I have to. So, just checking to see how they're doing.
Sure.
I love planting trees. When I'm not fishing, I'm planting trees this time of year.
Yeah. Do you do a lot of land management?
I do. I really enjoy it. I mean, I don't know. It's the only time I ever get blisters on my hands anymore, And so, yeah. And I try a lot of things that don't work too sometimes. But yeah, I plant a lot of trees and shrubs and food plots. And yeah, I just enjoy it.
Man, I feel like Dan and I are pretty busy, with the podcast and putting out videos and doing the TV show and all of that. But there aren't too many guys I feel like that are putting out more content or just as much. And I feel like every time I see you come across on social media, you got another video out or another podcast out. You stay pretty busy, Jason.
Yeah, well, I have a good team. I don't do it all myself. I've got a great team that helps me. All I got to do really is worry about the fishing, and sometimes I have to say yes or no. But I've got a great team that enables me to do all that. So.
Well, I saw a recent video, and this is a topic I wanted to bring up with you anyway, and you just happened to put out a video recently here this week that kind of talks about this. Dan and I have been doing a lot of fishing lately, and we, mainly we're targeting walleyes most of the time. And I've been seeing a trend, and I don't know if it's a trend overall or if it's just in what my experience has been, but in the last few years, we've been fishing shallower and shallower for walleyes. Is that something that, I'm just jumping on the train a little late, or are fish moving around and spending, are some of those walleyes spending a little bit more time in shallow water? Or have they always been there, I guess is what I'm getting at.
I think they've always been there. And I think, to me, what's appealing about shallow water, say less than 10 feet of water, is that, a lot of the stuff that's deeper, whether it's the tip of a deep point that goes off into deep water or maybe offshore structure, it jumps out to everybody with a map chip, and I feel like when you get up shallow, whether it's driven by, fish coming up onto shallow sand to suntan, or fish that are just using weeds in shallow water or rock, I feel like the stuff that's on a map chip in shallow water it's less obvious. And so I feel like on a lot of bodies of water, a lot of the shallow fish get left alone, and everything that's obvious and prominent deeper gets multiple boats on it each day. And I feel that's part of it, is that, if in an even world where you didn't have any boats or people didn't have map chips or access to that offshore structure, it's dynamite. And it was, I remember, before map chips, when waypoints meant something, and then when the map chips came out, and having that technology for the first time, it was unbelievable. But now everybody has it, everybody's using it, and so I feel like, especially with shallow weeds, I feel like less people do it, so you're dealing with fish that maybe haven't seen as much pressure, and especially with weeds, it's almost like you have to relearn the spot every time you fish it. I mean, things change so much, where say you have a 10-foot flat, just for argument's sake, and the weeds are coming up 3 to 4 feet, and you're throwing a jerk bait over the top of those weeds, and you catch fish. Well, then you go there, say, a week later, and the weeds are 3 to 4 feet taller, and you're fishing open pockets or open lanes with a slip bobber, or you're fishing the edges with a bullet weight and a spinner harness, or maybe a bottom bouncer on the outside edge. But you have to almost relearn it every time. And for a lot of people, that's frustrating, and so I think there's a lot of reasons why the shallow bites have been so good. And I think a big part of it is that if you can have a school of fish that, people just aren't messing with every day nonstop, I feel like your odds go up dramatically as far as just having quality fishing. Fish are way easier to catch if nobody's messed with them for a few days or more.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I remember watching, I think one of the first times I really heard about, targeting walleyes in shallower water was watching one of your videos actually on Devil's Lake. I think you were pitching reeds or something like that and catching some nice walleyes in shallow water, and my head just kind of went So is that, I mean, is it, obviously it's going to depend on your structure, right? And the makeup of your lake. Devil's Lake has a lot of areas like that. Have you been able to find areas like that on a lot of different lakes? Did you start off searching for things like that? Or when you went to a new body of water, I guess that new video is Capitogama, I think. When you targeted shallower water, did you have an idea in mind or something that you looked for to find fish there?
Yes and no. I mean, we try a lot of things that don't work. There's some places where I've just struggled to catch fish shallow, and ultimately, I think the biggest thing with fishing is know when to swallow your pride. You have ideas of what works, you have ideas of what you hope works, but ultimately, the fish have to meet you halfway. And so, we fish deep, we fish shallow. I don't like to fish deeper than 25 feet of water myself just because of barrel trauma.
Sure.
And so we very seldom ever film deeper than 25 feet. I mean, there's some great patterns in deeper water. I don't even want to show people that because I feel like if a lot of people start doing that, I feel like, in a lot of cases it can really damage a fishery because every fish you catch is dead, whether it's 12 inches or 30 inches, And so that's what I don't like about, excessively deep water. But there's every fishery, though, does have different nuances. Like Devil's Lake, for example, one of the things that we've been dealing with here the last few weeks off and on is the water's really cleared up. And so we're still finding fish less than 8 feet of water, but when you can see down in 7 or 8 feet of water, it's really tough. I mean, instead of catching 10 fish off a spot, you catch one, or you bump them, or you get a follow. And I think there's a lot of different reasons for that. I think first off, your presentation doesn't look as good when the water is excessively clear. And the other thing is the fish are a lot spookier. And the other thing that happens, the fish follow your lure a lot longer and a lot more. And sometimes when you're reeling in a fish, the fish follow that fish in more that's fighting, and then they get to the boat, and they scatter, and so there's a lot of things not to like about excessively clear water, but it's all relative, and so, typically like in Devil's Lake and a lot of these prairie dish bowl lakes, you'll even see it in southern Minnesota, eastern South Dakota, the Dakotas in general. You get algae blooms, you get stain in the water where, you might not be able to see down maybe a foot or two, and that's just perfect, and so if you get, with that also comes shallower weed growth where the weeds might stop in 6 feet of water, in stained lakes. And so that'll keep fish shallow. But, then you get over to Green Bay, the water's always clear over there, and you're dealing with clear water. And sometimes you'll find stain in the water, and sometimes it's, wind driven, or sometimes it's water temperature where you get cold water and it's clear water, and you got to get out of there. And if it's warmer water, it'll just have kind of a tea stain, or a little bit of a stain, which will help. And, but again, on Devil's Lake, for example, we might be using 10-pound braid in a 2-foot, 20-pound leader just to make it pike proof, but you could fish without a leader. Whereas there's a lot of fisheries like even Mille Lacs, it can be really hard to catch fish with braid. You have to use a really long fluorocarbon leader, like with an FG knot, so you can cast it through your guides, or you're just using straight fluorocarbon, or in some cases straight mono. But, there's adjustments you have to make, I would say, like Mille Lacs, for example, sometimes you'll find fish up shallow on a clear, flat, sunny day just because they're up there for the heat, and that's a big thing. That's a big reason the fish move shallow. It's to speed up their metabolism. They're not always eating up shallow. That's the thing to point out, too, is that everybody thinks fish go shallow to eat. Sometimes they go deeper or, mid-depth to eat. Say they're like, for example, fish on Lake Sakakawea or Lake Oahe, if they're sliding out to eat rainbow smelt in, say, 20 to 30 feet of water, but you're catching them up on a flat 10 feet of water, those fish are going up there just to digest their last meal as fast as possible, And so that's the other thing to realize, too, sometimes with shallow fish is they're not always up there to eat. They're up there usually to soak up heat,
Well, we were fishing, Dan and I were fishing a lake the other day, and we had how many degrees did the water temp drop overnight, Dan?
6, went backwards 6 overnight, with a heavy wind too, so a lot of that warm water probably blew out too, but it definitely went backwards in mid-June. It's always fun.
And yeah, when we had found some fish a little deeper the day before, and we got up and had that temperature change, and Dan said, let's go shallow, find that warmer water. And Jason, I had one of the craziest walleye catches of my life, probably. We were in, what were we in, Dan? 2 to 4 feet of water, probably?
Yeah, something like that.
Throwing a jig in a plastic, and there was trees and a lot of weed growth in there, and I brought my jig back in. I got it right next to the boat, and it was just covered in weeds. Had a long kind of tail off of it, and I was just kind of aggressively ripping that jig right next to the boat to try to clear some of those weeds off, and I caught a 25-inch walleye. This fish came screaming up from the bottom and hit this weed-covered jig that I was just ripping right next to the boat, smashed it. We all thought it was a pike the way that it hit. And sure enough, got it. All of a sudden there's, it's just like a boatside pike hit where there's water splashing all over and you're furiously trying to hold on to the rod as it's bouncing next to the gunnel. And, got it in the net quick and pulled it up, a 25-inch walleye. I couldn't believe it. But that's where we found him, in that shallow water that day.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's fun fishing, too. I mean, I enjoy standing up and casting. I mean, I'll catch fish however I have to. I like to troll. I like to, do anything to catch fish. But there's just something about casting a plastic or casting a jig or crankbait or whatever it is up shallow that I really enjoy. I mean, I just love the activity, I guess. I'm moving, I'm doing something, and walleyes are no slouches. I mean, I think in a lot of cases, people don't give walleyes enough credit for how good of a predator they can be. When they're on, they'll outcompete a pike or a bass or anything else in the lake when they're on. I mean, they'll eat, and so that's the other thing too, is you get to kind of see, probably some of the most aggressive walleyes you'll ever see, and they fight hard too. There's people that say, walleyes, they don't fight. And I tell you what, you pop a 25-inch walleye in 2 feet of water, you'll know you have a fish.
Yeah, that's what we talked about, because we caught some fish up shallow, and Dan said that multiple times, like there's nothing like fighting a walleye in shallow water like that. And I think it's almost like catching walleyes while you're it's like taking the best part of bass fishing, which is the action, right? Like casting and trying to hit pockets and things like that, and then get a hard fighting fish in shallow water. Only you're catching walleyes, which we all think is 10 times better. So not that there's anything wrong with the bass, of course. I heard something interesting, Dan. I think it was at Minfish when we were at that summit at Clam. They were doing some research on zebra mussels, and they brought up that they've seen evidence of walleyes moving into shallower water in lakes that have a large presence of zebra mussels, because they're changing kind of that ecosystem. And walleyes are trying to find different things to forage on, because some of their forage that was in traditionally deeper areas or in some of the typical walleye habitat has changed, and the food isn't there anymore. So they were going into shallower water to feed on some different things. Have you noticed any sort of correlation like that when you fish waters that are infested with zebra mussels, that you maybe found walleyes shallower more common, or is it just been a lake by lake basis?
Well, I have seen trends. I mean, the thing about zebra mussels or any type of invasive, it's like a house of cards. I mean, there's going to be a lot of change. Some of it's predictable, some of it's unpredictable. Just like a lot of dominoes fall at the same time. And that's probably the biggest thing, is that, if a lake is a premier walleye fishery before zebra mussels, it'll be a premier walleye fishery with zebra mussels. But the change is what anglers struggle with, and that's what ultimately can hurt the industry, is if somebody's been fishing a lake in Minnesota for 20 years and they go out there and nothing that they used before works. Well, then what happens? Sometimes people have a tendency to give up, or they just don't have the time to relearn and figure out all the things that are new, as far as the nuances. But, a couple of things that seem to stand out to me is that, you get a lot more weed growth, and you get some of that weed growth deeper, where the weeds just explode in lakes with zebra mussels, where, say, if the weed line quit at, say, 8 feet of water and it was sporadic, you add zebra mussels and those weeds might go out to, say, 15 feet or 18 feet, and the weeds are a lot denser and, just a lot more lush, and so the weed growth accelerates. And the other thing that I notice is that the smallmouth bass populations accelerate with clearer water. And, I don't think that smallmouths eat walleyes. I mean, they coexist fine. But what I think can happen is when you get, higher densities of smallmouth bass, they'll own spots. So I can remember lakes, for example, when I was a kid where there weren't many smallmouths, and there were certain rock piles, for example, where you'd catch a lot of walleyes, and then the smallmouth bass numbers exploded over time. And now you go on those spots and they're covered with smallmouths, and the walleyes are nearby, but they're not on the same spot on the spot as they were before the smallmouths, if that makes any sense. It's almost like the smallmouths will own certain pieces of real estate, and then the walleyes will, they'll be shallow, or they'll be deeper, they'll be, off the transition, whatever it is, but they'll be different, And so those are probably the two most pronounced changes across the board that I see. But yeah, I mean, things change dramatically a lot of times. You clear up the water and you add the weed growth and you add more smallmouths to the mix, it changes everything. So.
You use jigs and minnows in that video on Cab that I saw, and obviously you're a big user of plastics as well. We've been trying to get away from using the live bait or the live dead bait as much as possible now, and I've been trying to go to plastics almost exclusively. In fact, we've been on some recent trips where we've fished with guys using bait and have outfished them with plastics. The technology has come a long ways. Have you, is plastics got to be your go-to first, right?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of plastics. I mean, I just love the durability of it, and I can do so many different things with it. I'll use plastics whenever I can get away with it. I mean, whether it's on a spinner harness or a jig or whatever. I mean, I use plastics a lot. I don't use live bait unless I have to. I will say, I mean, I hear people say, oh, you don't have to use live bait, but like say, for example, if you were a guide and you have to catch fish every day, or sometimes when we're on the road and we got to come out of a lake with a show, there's times where, I would never say that, that plastics always outfish live bait. I think if you ever say always or never in fishing, you're making a big mistake,
Right.
But I use plastics whenever I can. I mean, that's my first go-to, and then some, but there's times where, you catch a few fish on plastics, and then if you catch, use live bait, you just start catching way more. And then there's a lot of times though where you can catch fish on anything. Well, then you better use plastics because you're gonna be so much more efficient, if that makes any sense.
For sure.
You can do so many more things. But I tell you what, like, I've been using that new Northland eye candy, and I've been using it on a drop shot a lot. And I tell you what, I've been going to a lot of places in Minnesota. Clear water, there's a lot of places, in Minnesota especially, and northern Wisconsin, where, they kind of have that reputation where you can't catch walleyes on artificials, or the windows to do that are very narrow and limited, and it's mostly a live bait deal. Maybe it's the lower density of fish, maybe it's clearer water, maybe it's the forage base. I mean, there's probably a lot of different factors that make some lakes tougher to catch fish with artificial, but I've been going to a lot of those types of lakes with the drop shot in particular, and that eye candy, and turning non-believers into believers. Like, wow, I never knew you could catch fish on artificials like that. It's always been a jig and a minnow thing on this lake, and if you're willing to experiment, chances are it's not. I mean, there's chances are you can catch fish on a lot of different things, especially a jig and plastic or a drop shot in particular. I mean, drop shot is just deadly on walleyes. I think that's going to probably be one of the biggest trends that we're going to see in the walleye world. Is going to cross over from the bass worlds. I think more and more walleye anglers, especially with forward-facing sonar, they're going to embrace drop shotting big time. It's so effective.
I want to talk to you about forward-facing sonar here in a second, but I want to stay on plastics for one thing, because I saw something pretty interesting. You had a video out about how you rig crawler harnesses with your with plastic, and you were using one of those new Northland plastics. You'll leave that second hook. You'll actually run the hook through the plastic, bring the plastic up pretty much up above the hook, and let that back hook just dangle free back there.
Yeah, absolutely. I started doing that, and my batting average improved dramatically. I mean, I was catching fish before by just hooking it in, just like you would a normal night crawler. You just nick the back of the plastic with a 2-hook harness. But then I started running it all the way through and letting it dangle, and I just feel like I just catch way more fish with it that way. And it doesn't really foul up with debris or anything. I mean, that spinner, if you're doing it right on a bottom bouncer, you're up out of the debris, So yeah, just let it dangle and fish it fast, and it's amazing how many fish you hook up with that.
Those new Northland plastics, we've used some stuff like from Live Target that's had that TPE plastic. That stuff is real durable. That's what these are made from. And then do you add scents to them then yourself then? Is there a scent that you like to use with them?
Yeah, I've been soaking them in scent, and sometimes you don't have to. I mean, sometimes, I always felt like if you're fishing, if you're fishing for aggressive fish, and if you can fish fast enough or give that jig enough pop, you don't have to have plastics. So it's more of a reaction. But one of the things that I found this spring, because that plastic is so much softer than traditional plastics that we're used to fishing with. It's a lot softer, and it's got a lot more action at slow speeds. And so I was using it, there were times where, for example, I'd cast on a fish. I remember one time on the Missouri River this spring, we cast on a pot of fish. There was probably 4, 5, 6 fish in that pack, and there was one big fish in there. And we were seeing them on side imaging, we were seeing them on forward-facing sonar, and we were dragging jigs of plastics through them, but we just couldn't get bit. And then I switched up to an eye candy that I've been soaking in Gulp Alive, and first cast, boom, they got it. And I think there's times where, say, the fish are off, and they're just, you need to fish slow, where I feel like soaking them makes a big difference. I'm not a big scent believer. I always felt like, to be honest with you, I thought most of my fishing career, I thought scents were kind of a joke. I remember back in the day, the Dr. Juice and the furry hooks, and it was just a joke. It all went away like the color selector. It's just it got a few suckers to buy it, and then,
marketing, yeah.
Then 5 years later it was obsolete. Why? Because when I forgot my Dr. Juice, it didn't matter. I still caught fish, And so I've always been pretty skeptical of that kind of stuff. But I do believe that there's situations. And the other thing too is that this particular plastic soaks up scent a lot better and a lot differently than anything else that we've ever had. I mean, you could take a regular soft plastic PV plastic worm or grub and soak in scent, but it wears off almost immediately. There's pastes and creams and different things you can apply to lures, and it wears off almost immediately. But that elastic plastic that the eye candy is made out of, it soaks up and absorbs the scent. And so I have just a Gulp Alive container, and I like to use that a lot. And I also use the Procure quite a bit, like the Smelt and the Shiner, and I just put it in the bag that the eye candy comes in, and I just spread that cream around, and then I just let it soak in there. And there have been times where, especially if I have to fish slow and on a tougher bite, where I'll swap out that eye candy after every hour or two just to add a new scented one that's been soaking in that solution. But I believe it does make a big difference.
Jason, I noticed in that last video too, you were using some forward-facing sonar. There's been some controversy about that. We've been running a live scope this year, and to me, it's been some of the most fun I've had while I'm fishing, trying to find those fish. And then to me, it's like being able to use your electronics in the summer like you do in the winter, when you can watch your jig and see how the fish react to it. It may be 50 feet from the boat, but you can literally watch your jig drop into a school of fish and see how they react to it, see their behavior, see how they're reacting to your cadence, etc. And just learn. I mean, we've found fish in places that we never expected to find fish, in schools of walleyes, 30 to 50 fish strong. Like we've seen, I mean, it's just opened our eyes, and it's changed the way we fish. Now, some people think that's a bad thing, of course. Anytime there's new technology out that helps you, become a better angler. I'm not going to say it helps you catch fish. I mean, obviously it has helped us find fish to catch. What are your thoughts on forward-facing sonar, and what do you think the future looks like?
Well, I try to embrace all new technology. I have fun learning it, and it's no different. Where do you draw the line? You look at spot lock or anchor modes on a trolling motor. I mean, there's some systems where that's completely changed everything. Now, people that had no boat control at all can now see you net a fish and spot lock right next to you.
Yeah.
And then you've got the map chips, which have changed everything. And so it's another tool. And the thing about it is that if you buy that technology, you're not just automatically catching fish. I mean, there's a learning curve to it. I think probably one of the biggest mistakes I made, starting out with it, is the day can really get away from you if you're trying to use it to find fish, versus use it to catch fish. Use your side imaging, use your 2D, use your other tools that you have to find fish, and then narrow it down and get really specific with forward-facing sonar. But, again, your time management can get away from you a lot easier. I mean, the day can go by so fast where you're leaning over that forward-facing sonar and in the wrong spots, or refusing to leave fish that won't bite. That's another mistake I've made where, you make a few casts at some fish, they don't want to play, they don't respond, they don't accelerate, you don't move them. Keep looking for new fish. And so it's a tool. I mean, it's definitely something that can make a big difference in some situations, but it's not the end all be all either. I mean, there's a lot of different situations where forward-facing sonar is a game changer. It's a deal breaker. If you're fishing a tournament, for example, and you're fishing against people that do, you're going to be at a disadvantage with some lakes, some situations. Then there's other places where the forward-facing sonar folks are at a disadvantage because they're leaning over their forward-facing sonar and the patterns are different. Maybe the fish are laying in rocks, for example, and you can't see them, or maybe the fish are deep and they're so spread out that the person without forward-facing sonar that's trolling is at an advantage. And so it's not the end all be all either. And that's the thing to stress is that it doesn't automatically put fish in your boat, but there's certain situations. And probably the big thing is I've learned so much. How much fish move, how fast they swim. Just panning that transducer where I think the fish should be, and then I go way over to the right where I would have never thought those fish would be laying, and there's 10 of them. What are they doing over there? It doesn't matter. You cast to them and you catch it. And so definitely a learning tool too. I mean, my understanding of fish is I feel like has increased dramatically. Being able to see with forward-facing sonar.
Yeah, it was eye-opening. It was really interesting. And Jason, you're from North Dakota. When you fish some of these North Dakota and South Dakota lakes that have flooded and grown, and you're fishing, trees and different things like that. When you go to a new lake that's been flooded over or has grown over the years, is the first thing you do look for a road that once ran through where the lake bed is now?
Well, road beds are really good. I mean, I've been catching a lot of fish on road beds back home on Devil's Lake. I took my oldest son out and one of his buddies, his school buddies out, and we just trolled crankbaits on road beds and caught all kinds of fish. The road beds get a lot of attention, and so that's, they're fishy. They hold a lot of fish, but they're also going to attract some boats, so it just depends. I mean, I've caught a lot of fish on road beds. You can't go wrong with that hard bottom on a predominantly soft bottom basin where there's a little bit of a steep ditch with rock. I mean, that's just a recipe for fish, But I do like to look at old aerial maps of a lot of these lakes, whether it's finding stock dams, rocky shorelines. Sometimes there's field edges where the farmers piled up rock. Any type of a hard edge, I guess is what I like to call it, where you had the old shoreline and there's maybe some wave action that created maybe a little bit of a cut bank or maybe some erosion where there's some rock on an old shoreline. Those spots are all good. And, sometimes it's just a shallow weed choked bay, but one thing I do find though is that a lot of fish are shoreline orientated on a lot of these dish bowl prairie lakes. There's not a lot of structure in the middle. I mean, there's times when there's islands and stuff, those will hold fish too, but a lot of it is, somewhere off the shoreline, either the shallow stuff inside the weed line, any type of rock, the outside edge of the weed line. I mean, you can't go wrong looking over that area, or those types of areas, when it comes to these prairie lakes, especially with high water.
Yeah, just be careful if there's still a guardrail down there on some of those.
Oh, yeah.
They get a little snaggy.
There's one road on Devil's Lake where there must be an old stop sign or something. I can't tell you how many times I've gone over that. Oh my God, that's a 9-10 pound walleye, and it's 3 feet off the bottom. I can catch that and snag it. It's fooled me a couple of times.
Well,
so yeah.
Well, Jason, you got up to Tobin to see our friend Barry Prawl up there at Trails End Outfitters, and are you going to make it up to Tasman this year?
Yes, yeah, we're going to go up there. I think it's early August, so I can't wait to see him again. And I was really intrigued by Tobin. I'd like to spend a lot more time up there. I really, really, really like that place. I mean, I just tapped the surface, and I know I didn't even tap the beginning of what the potential is on Tobin. But Yeah, and he's got a great cabin. I mean, I think you've been up there, haven't you? I mean, you've stayed up there. And
yeah, you bet.
Great cabin right on the lake. And I mean, it's just perfect. All kinds of deer mounts in there. And you go up there, you think, boy, I'd like to come up here every month of the year, I think.
We try to.
We try to, yeah.
I can see that.
We spent a lot of time up there. And got up there this March, actually did some ice fishing, or last March, got up there and did some ice fishing. Got to fish winter for the first time. So it's a neat place, and you're going to enjoy Tasman. So you'll see Barry up there. We'll be up there when you come up as well, too, and, of course,
great.
Trevor Montgomery. So we're excited to have you up there, Jason.
Yeah, I can't wait. I'm really looking. That's a trip I'm really looking forward to this year. I can't wait. I mean, I catch a lot of walleyes, and so for me to go up and you'll be able to target, trophy class pike and those big lake trout. That's just going to be really a neat exotic treat for me. So I'm really excited about it.
All right, Jason. Jason Mitchell, thanks for the time today. And real quick, where do people find your stuff online?
Well, probably easiest, especially if you want to reach out to us, just on social media, on Facebook or Instagram. Just look up Jason Mitchell Outdoors, or our website is jasonmitchelloutdoors.com. But yeah, we've got a lot of stuff floating around online as far as content, information, videos. You go on our YouTube channel, Jason Mitchell Outdoors, and find us there as well. So appreciate being on.
Very good. Jason Mitchell, thanks for the time today on the show.
You bet. Thank you, guys.
Sporting Journal Radio is a division of Macaba LLC. If you've got a question, comment, or story idea for us, send us an email. Go to sportingjournalradio.com. While you're there, you can learn how to advertise on the show and visit our store for hats, hoodies, coffee mugs, and more. Go to sportingjournalradio.com.